Welcome to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Agatha.
And joining us once again is Noel Thingvall.
Hello.
We've gotten grim news that the cricket match in Manchester has been cancelled, leaving us with little to do but discuss another example of master of suspense Alfred Hitchcock's love of trains with the production that marked the end of his time in Great Britain in high style. So brew up some Harriman's herbal tea and whistle a happy tune as we search every compartment to uncover the sinister conspiracy behind The Lady Vanishes.
The English lady, where is she?
There has been no English lady here.
What?
There has been no English lady here.
But it's ridiculous. She took me to the dining car and came back here with me.
You went and came back alone.
I know there's a Miss Roy. She's as real as you are.
That's what you say and you believe it, but there doesn't appear to be anybody else who's seen her.
I saw her, I think. That isn't Miss Roy. Stop the train! Listen, everybody, there's a woman on this train, Miss Roy. Some of you must have seen her. They're hiding her somewhere. Do you hear? Why don't you do something before it's too late?
Please, please.
I know you think I'm crazy, but I'm not. I'm not. For heaven's sake, stop this train!
No, come.
In a tiny hotel in the country of Bandrika, young English heiress Iris Henderson waits for the train that will take her home to her impending marriage. After suffering a head injury at the station, she's helped aboard the train by a kindly elderly governess named Miss Froy, with whom she strikes up a friendship. But upon waking from a nap, she finds Froy is missing, and none of the other passengers have any memory of her. While brain surgeon Dr. Hartz tries to convince her she's hallucinating due to her injury, Henderson remains convinced something is amiss, and reluctantly teams with musicologist Gilbert Redmond to find the missing woman and uncover the conspiracy behind her disappearance. As usual, we'll be discussing The Lady Vanishes in detail, so if you haven't seen the film and wish to remain unspoiled, we recommend watching the movie before listening to the rest of this episode. The Lady Vanishes was released by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer on October 7, 1938 for Gainsborough Pictures. I could not find any info on the budget or box office for this movie other than the fact that I know it was a hit at the box office, but no numbers existed for it anywhere that I could find. As for awards, it won the Best Picture of 1938 from the New York Times and the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Director. This is the only time that Hitchcock won an actual directing award. Even his Oscar was an honorary one. It ranked as the 35th Best British Film of the 20th Century by the British Film Institute and the 31st Best British Film Ever by Time Out magazine, and is based on the novel The Wheel Spins by Ethel Lena White. Okay, so what's everybody's first experiences with this one?
I saw it for the first time for this. That's when I saw it.
What did you think of it on first viewing?
Well, I enjoyed it. I think not that the story was a little bit of a mess, but the tone was all over the place. It was a comedy. It's a spy drama. It's mistaken identity. It's a mystery. It's gaslighting. It was a lot of things. And I didn't find that totally objectionable, but it did strike me as a little strange.
And Noel, how about you?
I would have seen this in the early to mid-90s. I think it was around 11, 12 when my dad introduced me to Hitchcock movies. You know, the main ones. I think we got into that with the Trouble with Harry, because that was around when I saw that for the first time, too. And I want to say when I was around 12, my mom was seeing a guy who, for Christmas one year, he bought me a box set of the early British Hitchcock movies on VHS. And so that included like Murder, Jamaica Inn, The Young and the Innocent, 39 Steps. So I got to see a lot of those ones, the original Man Who Knew Too Much. And this was one of them. And I absolutely loved it when I saw it then. I know I saw it a few more times throughout the 90s, but it's probably been well over 20 years since I've actually last watched it.
For me, I think this is one I caught up with in the late 90s once I started working at a video store and I was kind of going through all the classic films that I missed. I'll admit I'm pretty deficient when it comes to Hitchcock's very early British output. I've seen The Lodger, but I missed a lot of his big ones like The Original Man Who Knew Too Much, 39 Steps, Sabotage, Secret Agent, Young and Innocent. I haven't really gotten into those yet, so I do have to get back into those. But this one, I remember, as Agatha said, being a little struck by the weird changes in tone and not expecting it to go the direction that did. It's like it starts off as cute, sort of weird romantic comedy and ends with a violent shootout with the bad guys. It's like any other director would think that wouldn't work, but it really does work for me. I think this is a really great movie. It's kind of the height of Hitchcock doing a suspenseful but really charming, fun adventure romp kind of a movie, which is something that kind of disappeared a little bit until like you get to like North by Northwest, when his movies started to get darker and a little bit more edgy. But it is a ton of fun.
And that's something that I really like about Hitchcock, is that he'll let his films kind of exist in chapters where you're not only establishing things, but you're kind of lulling someone into expectations and then suddenly shifting the expectations. I mean, we see it with Psycho, with the whole opening sequence there, with the birds, how we spend like an entire half hour of the birds. It's just a romantic comedy. And then the birds start attacking.
Yep.
And then everything takes this big change, and then suddenly it ultimately turns into a siege film. He doesn't mind telling stories that take turns in terms of like, first half hour is going to be going in one direction tonally, then suddenly we're going to tonally shift in another direction, then tonally shift in another direction. The thing is, he remains consistent in that tone during that section.
Yeah, it's like where other directors would do a switch of who you think the villain is or even what the nature of the crime is, he will do whole switches in genre, but make it work.
Yeah, and that's actually something I really appreciate about him, and I actually like a film that is confident enough and skilled enough to successfully do that, where you think it's going to be one movie and then it becomes a completely different movie.
Now, as we mentioned, this is based on the novel by Ethelina White, which I didn't get a chance to read. So did you? And if so, what did you think of it?
Yes, I did. It was okay. It definitely has the interesting central plot there. The MacGuffin is less interesting. The characters are less interesting. The characters are less appealing. Everyone's just kind of a snobby asshole. They kind of are in all versions of the movies. I think what's good about Hitchcock's version is they're relatably and likable snobbish assholes for the most part. But the book leans very hard in the everyone who's British is trustworthy and everyone who's not British is not. But even then, you're running into conflicts where the British turn on each other, but not in a really satirical, making a point way. It's more just, everyone's just an asshole. Even Iris is an asshole.
Which I'd argue she kind of is here, but it's almost more of a brattiness that fits like a romantic comedy.
It's very elitist and very prejudicial. I don't just mean in a racial way, but in terms of like, he has an untrustworthy face,
And Hitchcock has said, I don't know how true this is, there's an urban legend that there's a true story that this particular story was based on, about a mother and daughter who went to a Parisian hotel during the Great Exposition of the 1880s. And when the older woman fell ill, the doctor sent the girl across town to fetch medicine. It took her hours. By the time she got back to the hotel, no one at the hotel had claimed to have seen her mother, and the hotel room itself had been completely changed. Different wallpaper, different furniture, everything. Supposedly, the true story is that the mother had bubonic plague, and the authorities decided they wanted to hush it up to prevent a panic. So they just got the daughter out of there and basically erased the woman from existence. And this same story would form the basis of the movie So Long at the Fair, and Hitchcock himself would reuse it for an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents called Into Thin Air that featured his daughter Patricia Hitchcock. Every once in a while, I noticed a couple little references in the movie to things. Mr. Todd Hunter mentioned something about, there wasn't much room during the exposition in Paris. I thought, is that a little reference to that urban legend, I wonder?
It could be. And what's interesting was I listened to that interview with Truffaut, where Hitchcock got into that story and how that was a style of story that he had been wanting to try to find a vehicle for a while. What's interesting about Lady Vanishes was it was a project that was already well into production when Hitchcock was brought into it.
Yeah, that's true. It had been developed for director Roy William Neill, who would later on direct most of the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes movies. And they had even sent the crew to Yugoslavia to start location photography, and apparently the police got wind of the script and decided they didn't like the way that the Yugoslavian authorities were portrayed and kicked them out of the country, and that pretty much ended up with the project being canceled.
And it's interesting that this was a script that was already well in place by the time Hitchcock came aboard, but Hitchcock still added his own flourishes to it in terms of kind of restaging certain sequences, like the whole sequence with the drugged wine, or the entire last shootout was something that was added at his request.
Yeah, because you could see where the film could have ended with the switch over in the ambulance and the train just pulls away and the ambulance goes away and that's it. And it would have been an ending, but it definitely doesn't have the impact that you really need.
And in terms of the changes from the novel, a lot of character stuff, like instead of Charters and Caldicott, you get these two elderly widows who I think are sisters. The couple having the affair are pretty much the same. There's two Englishmen who are helping her out. One is an older professor and one is a kind of young, snappy swinger. And they kind of took the older professor and fused him with the doctor, who in the novel is always treated with suspicion. The other big thing is Iris is someone who is just literally wandering off on her own because she's disillusioned with her family. She has no interest in romance or a future. It's literally a cautionary story about what can happen if you wander outside your country by yourself with no friends and no support.
One thing I do know they changed, and I feel like there's a little reference to this in the movie as well, is that in the book, instead of a knock on the head, Iris gets like sunstroke.
Yeah.
And there's that reference that she has when she's about to get on the train that, oh, I'll be, slightly more sunburnt when I get home, which I wasn't sure if it was a reference to that. But the switch to have it be that she accidentally takes the hit that was meant for Miss Froy.
Yes.
And that's what causes her to have this confusion and these headaches and constantly fainting is such a brilliant idea to work it into the story in a much more organic way, that the plot against Miss Froy is already in motion. And this is what kind of incapacitates her for the story rather than just, random sunstroke.
Well, it also changes the story a little bit, because if they'd been anticipating taking her out before she got on the train, they must have had to have thrown the train thing together very quickly. They have the patient come on at a different stop, so they'd somehow managed to get a message through that this was going to happen.
I was wondering if Dr. Hart's being on board was the idea was she was going to get hit in the head. Maybe they'd get her on the train and Dr. Hart's like, oh, she's injured. I'll take care of her. And then whisk her away. And that would have been it.
Mm.
Yeah. According to Hitchcock, that was the plan. And then that's why they had to stage the second one. In the book, there are no stops. The train doesn't stop. And then that's where the whole thing of, well, there's no way for her to get on or off the train is kind of more of a thing. The other thing is that Miss Froy is not a spy in the book. She is literally just a governess who happened to have been in the wrong place at the wrong time and had seen that someone was where they weren't supposed to be, and it could tie them to a political assassination, which she doesn't even herself realize. She's literally just a loose end that someone is trying to do away with.
I think that's a much more modern version of the same story. Like, that's a premise I think audiences would be better prepared to accept now.
Yeah.
And I think the changes that were made were to make it palatable for the audience then.
Yeah.
I almost feel like also that would have worked better if Miss Froy was the protagonist and she's like, I have no idea why these people are after me. What is it I know that people would chase after me?
Well, I think the book adds that extra layer of she has that confusion and that surprise of the scenario, but then that's also passed off to someone who is a complete stranger to her, who is surrounded by strangers who none of whom believe her. And I think you have that double layer of wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. And in the book, it also just gets darker in terms of like the romance where the professor convinces the guy to drug her drink because she needs to relax. He never fully believes her until the end. So the relationship is a lot more strained. I also want to say, if anyone wants to do a comparison between the two, the 2013 BBC TV movie version is almost a word-for-word adaptation of the novel.
Okay, I did get to see that one, so I wasn't sure exactly how close it was to the book.
The only real significant change they make is they remove Mrs. Froy being in place of the patient, which does come from the novel, but I think they remove that from the 2013 version because that's been such a central point of all of the adaptations that they just wanted to add one little extra twist.
Which I kind of appreciated that.
And the TV movie version, it's well directed, but it still runs into the thing of everyone's just kind of a snobby asshole. And you don't really care for them that much.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Hitchcock himself. So as we mentioned, by this point, Hitchcock had already had a really great run of suspense movies in England, and Hollywood was already starting to take notice. He was already supposedly in negotiations to make his move to America while he was making this, and he had a contract with producer Edward Black to make 2 films for Gainsborough Studios. After Young and Innocent, he had been hoping to develop Rebecca for them, but they just couldn't get it to go through. I think he wanted a bigger budget than they could offer. So Black offered him The Lost Lady, the original developed project for Roy William Neill, to Hitchcock. And after this, he'd make one more movie in England, Jamaica Inn, before relocating to America, but this was sort of considered the big send-off, the big splash he made in England before he left. And it is interesting to see this early in his career that his style is a little bit different, certainly visually. Like, he hasn't hooked up with Robert Burks yet, so that sort of prowling camera that we see in a lot of Hitchcock movies isn't quite here. But his style does show up in certain ways and in certain shots, and you can see how it would flower into what we know as kind of a Hitchcock movie. Some of his little tricks, like the POV shots of the ceiling shaking when Iris is trying to get sleep, or that great shot where she's looking at the passengers in the compartment one by one and seeing Mrs. Freud's face over them. Little things like that you didn't really see other directors doing quite in that style.
I think in terms of like the camera not moving as much, I think it's just that the cameras weren't mobile as much in general at the time. Even then, you do still get some stuff like the final scene is a single continuous tracking shot where they're sitting in the lobby of the embassy and they go into the room that reveals Mrs. Froy playing the piano is a single tracking shot that starts as a wide shot, then comes in close to them as we pick up their conversation. And then as they get up and walk towards the door, it's like someone runs in and pulls the couch out of the way. And the camera keeps following them through the door as they then part and reveal Mrs. Froy and walk up to the piano. So he is still doing these really long, elaborate shots at times.
It's funny, it didn't even occur to me that you're right about that. I remember he did a similar shot in Stage Fright where the camera starts outside a building, follows a guy through the doorway, and then into the room and beyond from there. I was so caught up in the movie, I totally missed it. Oh yeah, that's a pretty elaborate shot right there.
Yeah.
Or one I really like that's subtle, when Gilbert storms into her room and he's in the bathroom setting up all of his stuff, and Iris comes to the bathroom doorway and her back's to us, but we see her face in the bathroom mirror. It's a really cool shot of getting both the faces visible to us despite the geography of the scene. Really cleverly put together.
Yeah. And I think the differences in technique are more just, well, he kept growing, technology changed and allowed more, and he was shifting into color and widescreen and had higher budgets. So I think it was more just like the freedom that came with that. But I think you're already seeing a lot of how he still stages his scenes incredibly elaborately. Like the scene where they're having the drink with the professor and he believes the drinks are drugged and is waiting for them to take a sip. You know, even like with his gloved hand, like nudging the glasses closer. Or
the one gloved hand.
Yes, the one gloved hand. And even finding out that in some of the shots where you have the glasses in the foreground, they actually had foot-tall, oversized glasses that they were using just to emphasize them in the shot. And even the way that they use the empty part of the frame at the beginning of the scene, which is then filled by the glasses, and then the glasses are always present. That is a perfect Hitchcock construction of a scene where we know what the bad guy wants to do. We're just waiting to see if it actually plays out.
It's funny because we just talked about Strangers on a Train, and they did the same thing for the last shot of that movie, or next to last shot, with the telephone, where it's a giant telephone so it could stay in focus with the characters in the background.
Yes. And that's because they didn't have split diopters at the time.
Also, just that symbolism of it's really big because it's his entire focus of the scene is get them to drink this. And then when we cut back to them actually drinking it, it's just this tiny little thing in the bottom of the shot because they have no idea that they're poisoned. So to them, it's nothing.
Exactly. And then to even find out on top of that, they're not even drugged, but we don't know that at the time. We think that they are, so our focus is on the glasses.
It also goes to that classic Hitchcock chestnut about to do suspense, you need to give the audience information. And we have it with that scene. But also when it comes to Iris spotting Froy's name on the window again. I love that Hitchcock just drops it in that first shot as they sit down that we can see it. Gilbert doesn't see it. She doesn't see it yet, but the audience can see it. And then we just cut to them having their conversation about Gilbert's background with it out of frame, back and forth. They're having this pleasant conversation, but the audience should be going crazy. Like, no, it's right there. Just look, it's right there. That's a very Hitchcockian moment, and it's beautiful.
And then when she sees it, it gets wiped out and nobody else gets to see it. So again, he still subverts the actual payoff. And even stuff like, story-wise, the bag of tea.
Yes, exactly.
It's all set up, and we never even think that it's going to come into play, that suddenly the wrapper is going to hit the window. A lesser director would have, throughout the film, be like putting in insert shots of here's the tea in the wastebasket, here's everyone walking past the tea in the wastebasket, you know, thinking that that will build up tension. Whereas I love that merely the fact that she remembered that it was a specific thing of tea is what she believes is evidence, but is not something that's applicable. And then out of nowhere, it's suddenly revealed to him.
And then he can use that callback to let her know that he's seen it.
Yeah. Or even the patient with bandages. A lesser director would have us repeatedly see throughout the film this patient in bandages, whereas we see them bring the patient onto the train and then we never really see that patient again until the scene where they realize the nurse is wearing high heels.
It also, it's done in a way that doesn't draw so much attention to it. We already know the doctor's getting a patient at a different stop. We have no actual reason at that moment to suspect him, except, you know, we sort of know what movie we're watching, but there's been nothing overt.
And our misdirect is that we're watching outside the train for any other activity.
Yeah. Or then even to characters like Droppo, who at first it just seems like he's this weird cartoonish sort of stereotype of an Italian, and he's kind of comic the way he's creepily staring at Iris with that weird look. And it's slowly over the course of the movie we realize, oh no, he's in on this too, and he's a little creepier than we imagined.
Yeah. And then I love that the giveaway that he's the one who killed the musician in the beginning is the focus on the hands.
Oh, see, I totally missed that he was the one who killed the musician. I thought it was just some random thug.
It's because when he goes up to strangle Gilbert, they're shooting his hands in the exact same pose, in the exact same way as the hands that came out to kill the musician.
I missed that. I thought he was just somebody who happened to be on the train that they were like, they had something on him. So like, you're going to help us do this thing. Otherwise, we're going to cancel your tour. That he was just sort of something they could use out of convenience because their plot had gone wrong.
I think the kind of weakness of the plot, but it also works depending on the adaptation, is that it is a plot that requires an elaborate conspiracy to actually work.
And also a lot of happenstance of people who don't want to be involved being on the train, yeah.
And if it was meant to give her a concussion and have her on the train and the doctor is going to care for her, if that was the intention, they couldn't account for where she was, if it was going to kill her. There's a lot of... It worked. Somehow it worked.
I mean, if they could strangle that musician, why couldn't they just kill her before she even got on the train?
Exactly.
Yeah. That was a question. I was wondering if they wanted to get some information out of her first before they did that. I wasn't sure if that was sort of the idea. One thing I want to bring up, though, is Hitchcock, when it comes to politics, that Hitchcock seemed to enjoy stripping that out of the films when he can. In a lot of his spy thrillers, it really doesn't matter who the bad guys are. They're just, enemy agents. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And with this one, it just seems like a lot of the political subtext of this really comes from the screenwriters, as we'll get into them in a little bit. And that comes into the whole idea of the MacGuffin, that Hitchcock didn't really care what the thing was as long as it was something that the bad guys needed. I mean, you get to North by Northwest where he's just tossing off as, government secrets, I suppose, something like that. Doesn't really matter. I do love that this one, the MacGuffin, is so strange, a tune, that it's this ephemeral thing that can be passed to somebody else by just telling it to them, but it's not an object that somebody can take from somebody else.
Exactly, and I love that it's only upon rewatching the film that the presence and the significance of the tune really kicks in terms of that's the music that's playing under the opening credits. Mm-hmm. That's what we're hearing the guys singing outside, and we don't realize that that's him passing the tune to Miss Froy.
And her frustration that she can't hear it because of Gilbert's noise makes so much more sense, because you can see her like tapping out the beats and kind of memorizing it, and then that happens.
Yeah.
And one of the best things is because it's repeated so frequently during the course of the movie, it might be already stuck in the audience's mind. Mm-hmm. So they can understand, this information really does pass easily. I can't get this tune out of my head.
And then they'd spend so much of the film setting up Gilbert's musical abilities and knowledge to then have the twist where he forgets it. And again, like I could totally see another filmmaker being like, well, Miss Froy did die on the train, and he had to bring this to them, and he gets there and realizes he can't remember it. I know I've seen that twist somewhere else. Yeah. I can't remember.
It also goes to that thing of a movie doing something or having the characters have to do something that's almost a challenge to the audience. I've heard it referred to as like the Shelley Winters index when it comes to holding your breath. People see the Poseidon Adventure, and whenever that scene comes of Shelley Winters having to hold her breath and do the dive, the audience subconsciously feels themselves doing it too, holding their breath to see if they could do it. Mm-hmm. And it goes to like Day the Earth Stood Still with Klaatu Verada Niktu, that the audience is kind of thinking in their head, would I be able to remember these words at the key moment to keep myself from being killed? And here with Gilbert, it's like, I can imagine the audience being like, could I remember this tune over several days throughout all the events that I'm going through to be able to deliver it to somebody else? Everyone accidentally gets a tune stuck in your head. Could you keep it in your head if you had never heard it before that for as long as you needed to get the job done?
I could.
I know you could.
I can't even remember what the tune was, and I watched it this morning.
See, what would happen is we'd watch a TV commercial. You'd get another tune stuck in your head because of that, and then that would be it.
Yes.
Or I'd remember that it partially sounded like something else, and that would be enough for me to remember it, because that's usually what ends up happening.
In one of these versions, I think it was the 70s one, when they started doing the tune, I'm like, that sounds like this other song, and I started having that stuck in my head instead.
Yeah, it's like I'm just imagining going to the embassy, and it's like, save big money at Menards. Wait, what? No.
I love that she's like, no, that's the wedding march. You're getting it wrong.
Best part of waking up. No. What? No.
I think this song in the movie reminded me a little bit about O Christmas Tree.
Oh, yeah, because you kept doing that.
There was literally like 4 or 5 notes that was just "Oh Christmas Tree." So I wasn't joking. That's just my life.
It's kind of like me, how I can't remember all of Mr. Roboto and Final Countdown because they keep blurring in and out of each other. I keep thinking they're the same song.
I'm embarrassed to say that I know Mr. Roboto backwards and forwards. I would never have that problem.
That's why you're the embarrassed one.
Yes. I'm going to bring it up now, though, that that whole idea of the tune containing a code, I couldn't help but wonder if that was an influence on John Woo's Hard Boiled, where the characters use musical notes to send this code to one another. And in fact, in that movie, somebody uses Lionel Richie tune at one point. Are you somewhere feeling lonely? Hearing Chow Yun-fat sing that song for like a couple bars is really weird.
I could see that because I know Hitchcock was a big influence on Woo.
And then there's Hitchcock and trains. Agatha and I talked about this a little bit with Strangers on a Train, that the train pops up a lot in Hitchcock movies. Besides those two films, you've got North by Northwest, you've got Shadow of a Doubt. There's just a lot of train riding in his films. It's
a liminal state where you are in motion, you're going from one place to another. At the same time, the plot is also going from one place to another. I mean, it puts you in a situation where you don't know who you're with, you don't know who else is on the train, what's going to happen to the train. So there's a lot out of the hands of the characters. And that contained space can build tension the way it did here.
And I think Hitchcock also likes to explore travel a lot and people outside of their element a lot. And at the time, trains were the main form of long-distance transportation. And again, claustrophobic setting where you're forced into basically a community of strangers.
It also creates this sort of weird microcosm of society in the movie that, I mean, it has its own set class rules, its own authorities in terms of the people running the train, the rules of what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And like you said, it's sort of like this stagecoach thing of all these different people who have their own little dramas going on that clash with one another and bounce off each other and interact with each other and screw up each other's stories in different ways.
Also, he hated doing outdoor location photography, so it's a very easy thing to mimic on a set.
Oh, so that's really wonderful to know. I mean, it's something you can't control, and from what I know of Hitchcock, he did like controlling things.
That's why in The Birds, there's so many scenes where it's just like rear screen of the town behind the actors because he didn't want to shoot on the town.
And that level of control led to the point where Hitchcock actually insisted on filming all the background plates for what's outside the windows himself. He went on a train in France and just filmed them all in one shot. And Hitchcock supposedly had this weird thing where he liked to plan out elaborate train trips using British rail schedules, even though he didn't have any intention of actually taking the trip. He just liked the idea of planning it out and seeing where it was going to go, which I can't help but think reminds me of the way he would plan out films down to the littlest detail before he even actually started shooting.
That also feels a little bit of battle strategy.
Yeah.
I also wonder if maybe Hitch was a little bit of a train spotter. He just loved that weird sort of organization of them.
Just imagining Hitchcock sitting on a bench with a pair of binoculars and his figures just being like, oh, the 2:30 express came in late today.
I guess he hated to be anywhere away from home. When he would go abroad, he didn't like to leave his hotel room, but he actually liked the process of traveling. He liked to be on the train, supposedly. He just, when he would get somewhere, he would just, all right, here I am, I'm not leaving.
And I think also just character-wise, it's characters in a period of transition, you know, from their home to a locale or from a locale to their home.
The other big creative force behind this movie are the screenwriters. That's Sidney Gilliat and Frank Launder. Gilliat and Launder had written several films on their own before they teamed for 12 Good Men and 7 Sinners, and it led to this incredible partnership. After this, they teamed together on Night Train to Munich, great movie there. They Came by Night, The Young Mr. Pitt, and then eventually they'd move into producing and directing themselves, and they directed Millions Like Us together, which I did get to check out for this, and that was a great movie. You were right about that one.
Yeah, what's nice about this was it led me to check out multiple films that they were involved in, and I really, really want to dig into more of their work, both what they wrote and what they directed, and apparently they did settle into this nice partnership where they would co-write everything, and then Sidney would direct one, then Frank would direct one, then Sidney would direct one, then Frank would direct one. Because they did one film that they co-directed, but it was just too much juggling, so they were like, all right, you take a turn, I'll take a turn, you take a turn, I'll take a turn. And what's interesting is they weren't really that big of collaborators until Lady Vanished. They were just separate writers working for the same studio, and this is kind of the project that brought them together and created a collaboration for the rest of their careers.
And while Hitchcock might have been a little bit more apolitical, I love that they jump right into taking aim at British politics, celebrating the strengths that they saw in Great Britain and its policies, but also taking aim at their weaknesses as well. British isolationism, certainly in this case, that sort of British stiff upper lip, they love to just kind of poke fun at a little bit.
Well, and then following this with Night Train to Munich, which in many ways, which we'll get to later, is basically a sequel. That is one of the most openly anti-Nazi movies made during World War II. I've seen. It immediately takes a political stance about how awful Nazi fascism was, and the entire film is about continuing to remind us of how awful Nazi fascism was and calling it out at every opportunity.
And then Millions Like Us was about the British public uniting together to help with the war effort and this noble sacrifice. And in a way that, while it's a propaganda film, it actually really is moving and doesn't feel as preachy as that should have been.
What I like is it's a warts and all film about how hard this is. And the message isn't about how easy it can be or how great it'll become. It's not creating an ideal. It's just merely saying, this is hard, but we're all in it together.
And reading the screenplay for this, it's amazing that for like a 96-minute movie, it's a really dense screenplay. I mean, there is a lot of detail to it in the description and how it's written.
And that's common of old films where they were a lot more of a technical document. But it's still read very well.
Yeah, the structure that, I mean, you know, if you didn't know it was a Hitchcock film, you would not know this was a suspense movie until about 24 minutes in when that guy serenading Freud gets strangled. Up to that point, it really does feel like this weird comedy of manners, romantic comedy thing. And I mean, that's one of the longest setups, I think, for a Hitchcock movie before we get a sense of where the story's going. And even then, the real conflict doesn't happen for another 5 or 10 minutes later when Iris passes out, wakes up, and Freud is gone. And then we actually have the central conflict of the movie. That's a long time to make the audience wait, but it works. And all that setup, while a lot of it is comic relief, does feel kind of important to the film.
Yeah, I agree. I think they are incredibly talented writers, both in terms of story structure, but in terms of just the individual character moments and the individual sequences. And even having now seen multiple films that they've done, even outside of Hitchcock, I think they are an incredibly talented pair of storytellers and filmmakers. And I really, really want to dig more into their work.
And also, I gotta say, their hand with dialogue, there is just some amazing one-liners in this movie.
Yes.
Gilbert's whole comment about his father wouldn't leave a woman in trouble. He took it so far, he married my mother. And the implications behind that little joke, it's like, wow, okay, they got away with this in a movie back in the 30s is kind of incredible.
Yeah, I mean, even the whole misunderstanding with Charters and Caldicott over the maid wanting to constantly enter their room to access her wardrobe, you know, they think is like, oh, she's going to come in and strip down. And it's like, yeah, no, that's not, no. And she just wants to get her hat out of the hat box or change her outer dress, you know. And
that line of, they should have given one for each of us. Like, what? The hotel room. Oh, right. Yeah.
Yes.
Or it's less of a comedic line, but one that I love the double meaning of is after Dr. Hartz thinks he's drugged them, and his toast is, may if our enemies, if they exist, be unconscious of our purpose. That works on so many levels. It's such a beautiful line.
It is. And even just reading it on the page, it read so beautifully. It was a really well-written script. I really like this duo.
Yeah, me too. Now, moving on, we have to look at this also as sort of this portrait of pre-World War II England, and it's amazing looking at that way some of the interesting political messages and the foresight that these two had putting it into the film. Now, in the film, Bandrika is a made-up country, and the nationalities of the villains are kind of ambiguous, but we really get the sense that this is suggesting it's just before the onset of the war for France and England, that Bandrika is pretty much the Balkans, and the bad guys are the Axis powers, Nazis, Italians, what have you. They are starting to pick up power and starting to make their moves. Though Germany hadn't really begun conquering other countries yet, it already started to set the Nuremberg laws in place. People were already starting to be aware of just how bad things were in Germany. And Italy had already invaded Ethiopia, leading the exiled Ethiopian emperor to criticize the international community for turning their backs and warning the League of Nations, it is us today, it'll be you tomorrow. And that's kind of what we see in the movie of all these people who are like, this is not our problem. We don't want to be involved in this. We're just going to do our own thing and get to our station on time.
Yeah, and then learning that one of the influences behind this in terms of like the coded message is all about a secret treaty between countries is very much referencing when several of the European countries just gave Hitler half of Czechoslovakia.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking it could have been like the Rome-Berlin Axis Pact between Italy and Nazi Germany. But yeah, and those pacts that had really kicked off World War I because once one country was involved, well, everybody in the pact has to be involved and led to this incredibly huge conflict.
Boy, what are we looking at now that's in a very similar level?
Yeah, I was trying very hard to be like, push it out of your mind. The world's going to hell. I'm exhausted.
But it sinks all of this stuff into a light entertainment that's still this fun, charming movie. And that's what's really incredible. And you can ignore that as a viewer if you want and just take it as this light, fun, charming movie. But if you want to dig under the surface, it's all there.
We need a Ukrainian Mrs. Froy.
A Ukrainian Mrs. Froy would just kick their asses.
Oh, seriously, like an entire Mrs. Froy franchise of the little granny espionage spy?
I would watch it in a heartbeat.
I'd totally watch it.
Yeah.
And then there's the big theme that's going to come up a few times in Hitchcock's work of gaslighting, that this character gaslit to believe that something they witnessed didn't happen or that the situation isn't what they think it is. We'd see this in Rebecca to some degree, certainly Suspicion, Shadow of a Doubt, Spellbound, Rear Window, North by Northwest, Vertigo, all those kind of have elements of that. And the way it's put together here, my one complaint is I almost wish the movie had hid a little bit more of what was really happening from the audience as well as from Iris. So that when she wakes up and Mrs. Froy is gone, that for the first little while, and people are like, no, I haven't seen her, we're right in the same position of Iris of wondering, okay, is she hallucinating? Did she just associating this actual woman she met at the hotel with something that she thought happened after she hit her head? I wish they had gone on a little longer with that.
I think that is the flaw of the story, is that everyone who seems suspicious at first is actually part of the conspiracy, in terms of like not really revealing that any of them are just completely innocent and misunderstood.
Yeah. Although I do love the irony of that Miss Froy, who seems like this innocent person, also has some secrets of her own, as we find out.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Margaret Lockwood as Iris Henderson. Really fun, charming character. And I do love that they open it up with her being kind of an entitled brat.
But not in the same way the book is. The book, she's just complaining about everyone. Mm-hmm. In the movie, she's just very flighty and doesn't have any consideration. The big thing is also everyone is very quick to do everything that she says until she meets Gilbert. You know, she's very sweet and charming, but it's also like, sir, can you get me this? Can you go do this? Can you go do this? And it's like they're just doing what they can to help her through the situation. She's very, very privileged, pretty white girl.
Yeah, she's rich. She's used to wielding that to get what she wants. Yeah. And as soon as she gets on the train, that kind of disappears. Yeah. She doesn't have that anymore. Yeah,
it's less about entitlement like in the book, and it's more just about privilege.
I also like this idea, though, that she's giving up this sort of life of adventuring for marriage because it's something her family wants. They want this title that this guy has, and that she is kind of giving up being the wild child to do what society expects of her and what her family expects her to do. And then once she gets on the train and this situation occurs, she faces that again where everyone expects her to just shut up, just go with the program, just let the train get to the next station and not kick up a fuss. But she won't. And I think that kind of influences her decision at the end to give up on this marriage, that she's realized, no, I don't want to be the one who doesn't say anything and just does what everyone thinks I'm supposed to do.
Or I just want to marry who I want to. I am my own human.
Yeah.
That's such an alien concept for 1938.
Oh, yes.
I know.
And that's, again, where they kind of invert the book, where, again, she's just an absolute loner, kind of rejecting everything, even to the point, the book makes a bigger case of this than the movie does, is that Miss Froy is supposed to be annoying. And you kind of get a bit of that with Charters and Caldicott reacting to her, but even in the book and the 2013 film, Iris just finds Miss Froy very aggravating and very frustrating. And that's kind of supposed to be the big twist, in that this person that she doesn't even know and doesn't even particularly care about goes missing, and she's the only one who realizes it.
I also like how in the film version, because she's someone who she's had this head injury, she kind of needs taken care of. Miss Froy is, or at least says she is a governess, that it kind of puts Iris into this child position during those scenes, that she is this kid who needs to be taken care of. And her whole process of fighting for Miss Froy and pushing back against everybody else is sort of her maturing as well and coming into her own opinions and her own actions.
And in the book, also, Miss Froy was just a middle-aged woman in her 40s, and some of the other adaptations kind of stick with, like, 40s and 50s. Here, they specifically got an actress who was 75 at the time. And I'm wondering if that was just even kind of heighten that maternal aspect while also heightening the kind of underestimating Froy as a spy.
It does make her line about that her mother and father are still around be like, wow, there must be some good genes in that family.
And that's an interesting bit from the book that didn't make it into the 2013 version, was where after Iris gets so bombarded with everyone just refusing to believe her to the point where she even just kind of gives up and rolls with it, it's like getting to the point where the reader is like, well, Miss Froy maybe didn't even exist. The next chapter cuts to Miss Froy's mother and father thinking about how excited they are that their daughter is going to come see them.
Oh boy, I'm glad they didn't do that for the movie. That would have completely undercut the suspense on leaving the train.
But I do think Margaret Lockwood is really good. You can definitely see why she instantly launched into stardom. She's very charismatic. She does a good job at covering a big emotional range that this character calls for in terms of both the stress and the charm and the romance and the horror. I even love that when you're having the whole fight scene in the truck of the car that has all the luggage, she gets stuck in the middle of that fight scene too.
I love how at first she's just sort of cheerleading for a lot of it.
Yeah. But then I also love it's like, oh, get the knife, get the knife. So then she can't reach the knife, so she gets a piece of luggage, stands up on it, goes, bites the hand, gets the knife out. And then like even as they're rolling around on the floor, she just kind of gets caught under it. Mm-hmm. I love how messy that fight scene is.
Me too. My one disappointment with the character in this version, and it's something that some of the various versions deal with in certain ways, is I feel like she kind of becomes passive in the third act once Mrs. Froy is found. I mean, the most she gets to do is sort of to distract the cop long enough for the nun to go and change the tracks. And I do wish they could have given her a little bit more to do. It's one thing the 70s one does that I like, is that she ends up being the one who has to go out, switch the track, and try and catch up to the train at the last second and kind of save the day. And I do wish they'd given her a little bit more like that to do here.
Yeah, and I think even going beyond that extended third act that they added with the train fight, the whole final confrontation becomes more about Gilbert climbing across the car, putting the clues together, confronting the doctor, and then like catching the bite. And I do kind of love the humor of while he's off doing that, Iris is literally just doing calisthenics in her car to try to keep from falling asleep from a drug that she never had.
Yeah.
And again, that's because they have her just randomly faint again. And I wish that, again, she had been more involved in that sequence. And then even with then the further third act, yeah, even if it was just that she was the one who hopped out and switched the tracks.
Or even if she could have been the one who, after having all these people not believe her for the whole story, she's the one who rallies everyone to fight back and to resist the attack. Something like that, anything. I just wish they had given her a little bit more to do towards the end.
And here's one of the interesting things that kind of bleeds over from when I first saw this is, in my memory, I remember Miss Froy and Iris picking up guns and shooting as well. And I realized that I'm remembering the 1930s version of The Man Who Knew Too Much, which also has a shootout in the end, where a big plot element had been that his wife was a multiple award-winning sharpshooter.
I would have given anything to see Miss Froy pick up a gun and start firing here. That would have been incredible.
Goes out in a blaze of glory, yeah.
But Lockwood, I really liked her. I guess she's worked with Carol Reed a lot in different films, like Midship and Ease Me, and they'd worked together on Night Train in Munich after this. I want to seek out more of her work because I really do like her here. I guess Hitchcock said of her that he was fond of her because he felt she photographed well and she worked well with dialogue, which, considering Hitch's views on actors, is probably a rave review from him.
Especially considering his view on women actors.
Yeah, very true, yeah. Moving on, we have Michael Redgrave playing Gilbert Redman. Now, I guess Hitchcock had wanted to work with Robert Donat again after 39 Steps, but Donat didn't want to be typecast in suspense films, and he was suffering from an onset of asthma. And Redgrave had a tiny part in The Secret Agent along with John Gielgud, his stage partner, and he was reluctant to do this movie until Gielgud kind of pushed him to sign on, but he's really great. I think he's incredibly charming in this. He's like Errol Flynn without all the creepy real-life baggage.
Yeah, but the problem is I really dislike, just in concept, the whole sequence of she complains to management about the noise upstairs. They evict him from the hotel, so he just invades her hotel room and forces himself on her space in a very creepy way.
I agree. It bothered me. I mean, she's unpleasant, but
she's not wrong to be calling him out for that either.
Exactly.
She's not wrong to call him up, but also they hear, I'm going to bribe and have him kicked out. Because I'm rich, I get what I want. I want this guy taken care of and just kicked out of the hotel. Which, I mean, obviously that wouldn't have happened if she hadn't bribed the guy, if she didn't have money to throw around.
So we can accept that she has grown through the movie. She's more than just the rich heiress. She's adventurous. She's stoic. She has a mind of her own. But has Gilbert changed from the beginning of the movie to the end? Has he kind of remained the same person?
I do think he changes because he kind of dismisses her and he dismisses all of the whole thing about Miss Froy pretty quickly and starts to realize over the course of it that no, she's right and everything she's been saying about there being a conspiracy is true as well.
Well, that's a change of, how he's viewing her. But as a person, she changes. She's done doing what other people are telling her to do. Mm-hmm. And that's a massive change. His character mainly remains the same.
I think his growth happens early in the film when, she's stumbling in looking for help and he goes from this is my enemy to she's in trouble and I need to help her.
I see.
From then on, while he's questioning things, he's still pretty consistently on her side and supporting her and is pretty much the muscle carrying us through the story for the entire remainder of it, where she's the one who believes, but he's the one who has to do the fist fight. He's the one who has to ask the questions. And he's willing to do that, I think, just because he's intrigued by the situation and he's intrigued by her, and also because it's the romantic duo.
At the same time, she's not being taken seriously because she's a woman, and
yes.
the idea that he has to do the fist fights, he has to talk for her.
Yes.
It takes away her power in what she's doing. Like she right. So the idea that he's an extension of her is interesting.
To the point where she's our viewpoint through the story, but even when, as we said, we get up to the third act, it's pretty much just Gilbert leading the show. Mm-hmm. He's the one who has to remember the tune. He's the one who has to get the train started. So it's literally Gilbert is the action hero driving the story.
I also feel like Gilbert is kind of glib and doesn't really take much seriously at the beginning of the movie. And by the midpoint where he is going to risk his life and do these things like climb out the window to try and save Miss Froy, that he is taking risks that he wouldn't have at the beginning of the story.
Also, the whole scene where he's playing the music and having everyone dance for him in the beginning doesn't make any sense that the manager of the hotel wouldn't be chewing out his staff for being the ones to stop and do the dancing in the room. When they obviously don't look like they're that invested in the dancing. They look like they've just been talked into doing it by him. And you'd think the manager would be like, get back to work.
And the manager, I get the sense he's not a very strong-willed guy. I mean, the fact that Gilbert can kind of talk him and push him out of the room that easily, and it's not until he has extra money in his hand that he's going to go and actually kick him out. I feel like the manager isn't really strong enough to do that.
It doesn't even make sense that he wouldn't end the situation by just telling his staff to get back to work instead of dancing for nothing. And it's like, okay, then you're still going to have the guy playing the clarinet up there, but you're not going to have the stomping on the floor at least. It's an oddly, I mean, as much as I love the writing in this movie, that is an oddly set up sequence.
I think it's just that Gilbert talks him out of the room so quickly and forcefully that he doesn't really even have a chance to think to do that.
But I mean, you're right in terms of just the manager being kind of weak-willed, because I even love how they set that up with, you know, there's this whole disaster. Everyone's going to have to rebook their room. There's this whole chaos of everyone rushing up to the desk. And he sees Iris and her friends and is just like, okay, let me just go talk to them for a couple minutes.
Everyone else just stops to stare.
I do like the idea that this is such a small inn, and what's happening right now is just way out of the inn's league. I mean, they're
out of food. They're out of rooms.
Right. He's probably just so completely overwhelmed. And I know I've been guilty of this. When I get overwhelmed, I'm like, look at the flowers over there. And that seems to be what he's doing to cope with the situation.
See, and you'd think that the setup to get the two people to meet each other for the first time is they have to split a room.
Yeah, that would be the obvious one.
Right.
Instead, we get Charters and Caldicott in the maid's room.
And the relationship between the two reminded me a little bit of It Happened One Night.
Yes.
I've actually heard that spouted as an influence here.
Right.
Well, that triggered the whole wave of rom-com and in cinema that happened for the entire rest of the decade.
Getting back to Redgrave for a second, though, supposedly he had a lot of trouble here kind of adjusting to film acting because, I mean, being from the stage, his impulse was to improvise and workshop his performance over the course of things and get it right. And he had to constantly be told by Hitchcock, no, it has to match take to take. You have to do it exactly the same way over and over again. And he just felt that Hitchcock wasn't an actor-friendly director. It wasn't until, I guess, Paul Lucas had seen Redgrave on the stage and one day during shooting kissed his hand and said, you are an amazing actor. You could be doing so much better on this. And that really pushed him to take film acting seriously. And Redgrave took that to heart and said that later on that he could watch this movie and see the scenes that were before that incident where he wasn't really trying and the scenes after where he was a lot more committed to it. I can't tell the difference. I think he's great throughout.
I mean, there's some scenes where he kind of fades more into the background, but that's just because of it's about the ensemble. But I mean, he is a very good dashing male lead. He does capture the cockiness of the character really well, to the point where you kind of like him and you kind of don't. He's got that scoundrel aspect to him.
Absolutely.
I mean, what's interesting was when I was reading the script, because I hadn't seen this movie in like 20 some years. I didn't remember who the actor was who played the role or how it was played. I'm reading the script and we get to that whole sequence where he's introduced and I'm like, man, how would you sell this character? And it popped in my head. Cast Richard E. Grant.
Oh, that would be kind of amazing. I could totally picture that.
just lean into the fact that he's a charismatic asshole. and I thought that what Redgrave brought to it brought enough of the acknowledging that he's a dick, while also playing up just how charismatic and confident he is at it.
I got a real Leslie Howard vibe from The Petrified Forest. This guy who's kind of wandered around and done stuff, and he's just kind of like glib about everything and philosophical in his way. And now he's really pushed in a situation where he has to kind of move beyond that.
And I just love the idea that he's writing a massive book about folk music
that he knows probably nobody's ever going to want, but he's going to do it anyway.
We never see him like lugging notes around. So it's like, is he just kind of using that as his excuse to travel around and drink and party and play music?
And even though he's on the opposite end of the spectrum class-wise from Iris, they have this same kind of never-do-well adventurer thing that he's like probably always been like one step ahead of creditors everywhere he goes, just kind of running around doing what he can.
Oh, I just had an idea. What if, like, one of the bits is he always has a notepad on him and he's always jotting down little bits and riffs and tunes that he thinks up of or hears and all that stuff. And then when Miss Froy gives him the tune, he jots it down. But then one of the big twists is when they get to it, he can't separate it from the other tunes that he's jotted down. and it would be kind of like that Trouble with Harry where he's actually sketching the dead guy, but then has to figure out how to, like, cover it up.
Now, I just picture him at Whitehall, like, all right, try this one. Nothing? Okay, all right, try this one.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, try this one.
Oh, God, yeah. And if you had never brought in Freud, it'd just be they're just trying to decipher all the tunes until they find one that actually makes sense in code.
They're just rolling their eyes at this guy like, we have to deal with this. Come on.
It's somewhere in there.
I know I've seen Redgrave and other things. I've seen the version of 1984 he was in. I've seen The Innocents. I keep meaning to check out Dead of Night, which has a couple other cast members from this, and The Dam Busters. I got to catch up on more of his films because I really liked him here.
Yeah, he's someone I can't instantly think of anything else I've seen him in. Of course, I mean, his offspring we've seen many, many times in many places.
Oh, yeah. Lynn and Vanessa Redgrave. Yeah.
So many Redgraves.
Moving on to an actor that we've discussed in a previous episode, Paul Lucas as Dr. Hartz. We talked about him with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where honestly, I wasn't impressed with his performance in that one. And I kind of feel bad about saying that because I think he's wonderful here. He is such a great villain.
He is so good in this movie because I like that it doesn't surprise you when it turns out to be a bad guy, but he's so likable and presents himself so charmingly.
Yeah, he's charming when we're still taking him at his word about his rationale for what Iris is going through. And Iris says, you're wrong. Somebody else has seen Miss Fry on the train. He's like, well, my theory was still valid, but I guess I'm wrong. Hey, good luck. He seems like he is willing to concede when he's made a mistake or when there might be evidence that Miss Fry exists. So you're like, okay, maybe this guy is reasonable. And going to Hitchcock's very shady view of the police and authority figures, he's another sort of villainous authority figure. He's this guy who seems to have all the answers, who it's like, yeah, the audience maybe should be mistrustful of this guy.
Even as an actor, he's doing a lot of just little things, and he's one of those great actors where you can tell that he's just listening and responding to what else going on around him. And again, that whole scene with the drugged wine, where he still has to keep up the appearance of being the friendly, charming person that we believe that he is, even though it's already been revealed to us that he's a bad guy. And we can see through his reactions that he's reacting to the drugged wine and wanting them to take it, while still also putting on this facade of friendliness and believing what they're saying and, trying to help. And it's a really great way of allowing us as an audience to see the veneer.
I noticed that a lot more on this viewing of the movie, that in the background of scenes before that's revealed, you can see him sort of looking on nervously or being a little tense at certain situations of like, shoot, they're onto us. Watching it again, that moment when they come in and nearly uncover Mrs. Froy as the patient, and he's like, what are you doing? After they leave, and you can see he realizes what a close one that was and how close they came to actually uncovering everything. Instead of making him a weak villain, it does make him a more interesting villain.
Yeah, and what I like is that he's one of the few that you only in hindsight do you see a lot of that.
Yeah.
Whereas pretty much everyone else in the conspiracy, acts suspicious from the beginning. And of course they're suspicious because they're in on it. Even when they're like doing that interview with the waiter where they're like, but no, you served two of us and she ordered this wine. It's like, no, I only served one and you used our housing. You can see clearly he's doing little looks and trying to hide.
Yeah, whenever she's not looking at him, he's like, ugh.
And the Baroness and El Drapo just look suspicious from the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. With Lucas, once he's revealed as the villain, he delivers a lot of lines in a way that some other actor would really dig into, the mwahaha, I have poisoned your wine. And with him, it's much more like, yeah, I had to poison you. Sorry, I really wish you guys hadn't put me to this position, but, It
was very matter of fact. And I agree, could have very easily gone into mustache twirling. I'm glad it didn't. I think it serves the movie better.
Or the last scene where they get away and he's watching them go, and instead of being like curses, he's like, oh well, good luck to him. It's almost like he admires them for what they've pulled off, that he's like, he can't really even curse their escape, just like, fair play to them, they did good.
They respect the game.
The one weird bit is when he finally reveals to them and he's got a gun in his pocket. He keeps the gun in the pocket. It literally looks like he's standing there with an erection.
I couldn't help but think that.
It was unfortunate.
Which is weird because they're in a closed room by themselves. Just take the gun out of your pocket.
Unless you wanted to make that, like as a filmmaker, Hitchcock may have wanted to use that. I mean, he does a lot of imagery like that
like
anyway.
a psychosexual type thing.
Right. So it may have been that.
I have penetrated your plan. Ha!
I read it more as this doctor, as a spy, this is not the kind of thing that he does. So he doesn't actually have a gun. He has something else and he's trying to pretend he has a gun.
He doesn't actually have,
that
he's
been
bluffing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Especially because the one person on the train who claims they're a pacifist actually has a gun.
Yes.
So the reveal that he didn't have a gun would have been beautiful.
Yeah.
The one guy who has a pacifist is the one guy who refuses to work with everyone and then dies waving a white flag.
Yes.
But also, I think it's interesting that Hartz is recognizable to Gilbert. He's heard of this guy. He knows who he is. So, again, this idea of not everything is what it seems. Same as Mrs. Froy seems like a sweet, gentle lady who's also a spy. He's this respected brain surgeon who immediately that seems to give everything he says a little bit more of an edge of authority that, oh, okay, he actually is a brain surgeon. He knows what he's talking about. If he says Iris is hallucinating, maybe he's right. But the fact that, no, he's actually an enemy agent who also has been pulled in by the villains is kind of interesting.
Well, and I think it's also that he doesn't want a situation where we're just going to kill a bunch of people.
Yeah.
You know, he's trying to avoid that. And so that's why it's like, well, I'm going to have to kill her, but I don't want to have to kill anyone else. Well, it looks like I'm going to have to kill you too. It's not that he wants to kill, but he's willing to, but it's still inconvenient to him.
I mean, when he drugged or thought he drugged them, it was a normal dose. So it was just going to make them unconscious for a while. And because...
I doubt it was.
Oh, you think so?
Mind. I think he intended them to die.
I don't think so.
I didn't think so. Because I think he ended up having to get to the point of killing them after they faked being drugged and kept investigating.
Yeah, he says that to the nurse.
But also then if it wasn't fake and he still got off the train, they would still tell the story.
True.
And they would still out him to enemy agents and enemy forces. Whereas if the train arrived there and you just had two people who died of an overdose...
See, the thing is, at that point, I think her reputation was in such tatters, I don't think anyone would believe her. It's still that she is somebody who had a head injury. There's still no evidence of Miss Froy anywhere in the train.
But
Nobody
they still have
it.
the answers, and that would still at least deprive authorities of the answers.
I don't know, because he's so angry at the nun when he comes back on, like, now thanks to you, I have to kill 2 more people. I don't think he was intending to. I think he did want to just drug them, have them wake up at the station, and that would have been it.
Yeah, I didn't think about that line. But yeah. Again, fantastic actor. Apparently was like a heartthrob leading man back in the 20s. I would love to see some more of his work, just to kind of see what his range was like.
The only other one I've seen is a movie he did with Errol Flynn called Unknown Glory, where he's a guy who's trying to convince Flynn's character to take on another identity and be executed to save this World War II resistance leader. It's so-so. He's kind of annoying, honestly. Toward the later years of his career, when he started to have trouble remembering his lines, supposedly, his acting kind of slipped a little bit. He started to get a little bit aggressive or just like not very cooperative with other filmmakers and actors, and I think it shows, but here he's wonderful.
Yeah. And also his eyes reminded me so much of Billy Crudup.
It's funny, I kept being struck by, because he's from Hungary, his voice kept reminding me of Bela Lugosi.
Well, he does also remind me a lot of when Bela Lugosi was in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Oh, yeah.
Was where he had put on the veneer of being this charming guy. It's like, oh, hey, come to my home. Let's go to the Halloween party. Hey, how you doing?
See, I was thinking of The Black Cat, where Lugosi gets to play a good guy, and he's hanging out with that couple on the train, and he's trying to be all nice and charming to them. I kind of got the same vibe there.
We need more charming Bela Lugosi movies.
Oh, I know. That's one of the reasons I love that movie. To get to see him play a good guy is such a nice switch.
Like, imagine like a movie where it's like you take the Charters and Caldicott type of characters and you have it be him and Boris Karloff. And they're just these guys who just go on vacations and solve murders, you know?
He's like the exotic, charming one who kind of is a hit with the ladies. Karloff can be the doddering, fussy guy.
I mean, just imagine him on karaoke night.
Oh, Lugosi on karaoke would be amazing. And Karloff talking about the cricket. We've missed the match, sir.
Yeah, Karloff just likes to, when he gets drunk, he likes to just stay up and tell stories. Lugosi, when he gets drunk, party man on the stage.
But also gets really aggressive with the help. What do you mean?
I'm just imagining like Bela Lugosi like going all in on like a Gwen Stefani song.
Oh man, a Lugosi Karloff road movie. I want this now. I want this.
Don't sleep. I don't need no reason.
Bella, get off the stage, Bella.
He's always doing this. Embarrasses me everywhere.
And Peter Lorre's like the guy who wants to hang out with him, but they're like, no, sorry, we're full up.
Yeah, they just keep running into Peter Lorre and then just kind of like find ways to get away from him.
Guys, I know where there's a party we can go to. We can hang out, yes.
Oh, you should try the cheeses.
I saved you a pickle.
Wow.
Sorry, that got off on a tangent.
Yeah, leave it in though. That was a fun one.
We're staying in. All right, speaking of charming, let's talk about Dame May Whitty playing Miss Froy. Oh, I adore her as Miss Froy. She's so lovely and sweet. Seeing that 2013 version where, she's kind of supposed to come across as annoying, mostly because the lead character is also like in horrible pain because of her sunstroke.
Yeah.
Here, though, as soon as she starts talking, I was like, I want to hang out with Miss Froy. I want to just like talk about Bendrika and music.
Yeah. Oh, she was pretty handsy. Really handsy. In fact, I actually found that annoying. Plus, she had some affectations to her speech that I found distasteful.
See, it's interesting. The handsy thing, I wonder, is that part of her thing as a governess where she has to grab the kids and like
I don't
herd
think
them in
she's
line?
really a governess.
That's the question I've had is like, is she a governess who, because of her position taking care of kids in some particular situation, got recruited to be a spy? Or is she a spy whose cover is that she's a governess just so she can travel around?
That's what I think.
I kind of lean toward, I want the second one to be the case because I just love the idea of her being, just a spy who's like just really smooth. But
Yeah, no, I love that idea of, she's going to get all the state secrets and make sure the kids get to bed on time.
But I mean, some of her verbal tics, I wonder if that's sort of an affectation she puts on to convince people that she is this harmless old lady.
Oh, I absolutely think so.
Because, it goes all the way up into the ending during the third act where she doesn't want to really reveal what she's doing and what's going on. But, oh, it's charming. It was nice to meet you, too. I'm going to go run out into the gunfire. Hey, have a good time. And I especially love, when she gets to the end of running, she just leaps.
And you can't tell, all right, did she just get hit or did she leap for cover? Yeah.
And I love that Angela Lansbury did that, too, where she just leaps into a river.
Yeah. I love little things about her character that reveal a lot about her. Like the last thing that she says before she disappears is, oh, you sit down. I'm going to work on this acrostic, this idea of a puzzle that she's going to work on. That might be something she would do as part of her work with codes and things. Or
I thought it was something like cross stitch.
No, she said acrostic.
Oh, I've never heard that term before.
It's like one of those things like a word puzzle where it's like the first letter of the first thing, the second letter of the second line, and it forms a word. Edgar Allan Poe used to put them in his poems all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, we as a society don't know anything about word puzzles anymore.
Or when she takes Iris to the dining car and she sits them in the middle and she's like, you want to face the engine. I got this idea of she sits in the middle so she can have an eye on the exit, but be equidistant from both exits in case she has to run one way or the other. She's like,
she is very aware.
Yeah. She has this Jason Bourne sort of, I know where all the exits are. I know exactly what I have to do to get out of a situation kind of thing.
Oh, and I wonder if her creating the affectation of someone who is annoying and long-winded is to get people to tune out and avoid her.
That would make a lot of sense. And maybe even not see her so she can kind of just blend in.
Or if she is that obnoxious, they will avoid her.
Yeah. Even the thing with her tea, I was like, is this a thing of I want to make sure I don't get drugged in their tea. So no,
That's
use mine.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And I'm wondering if maybe she's also helping Iris out because, it could just be that she has genuine concern for her. But I wonder if she also knew that Iris took a hit that was meant for her.
That's a good question. It seems like she should recognize that.
You see her look up, so she realizes where that potted plant came from.
Yeah, and she really becomes at that moment very focused on getting her onto the train and taking care of her, so...
Also, I just realized I love that Iris is wearing a turban in that scene as an explanation for why she didn't die.
I hadn't thought of that, but you're totally right.
But yeah, I do like her performance. Again, it's one of those ones where this is a film where, and this goes with a lot of Hitchcock films, when you watch it multiple times, you just see all these extra layers to the characters and to the situations.
I love that when they're hiding her in the little bathroom in the car, she's just like, oh, it's just like being on the London Underground.
Yeah.
She's like, so...
She's fine. Yeah. She's fine in there. I love that there's a whole cubby that has a sink, and I'm wondering, is there a toilet that pulls out, or... I'm wondering how stocked those rooms are.
I would hope it would have a toilet. We know there's one down the hallway that Caldicott and Charters keep hiding in, but...
Oh, man, just dumps all out on the tracks.
Oh, and speaking of great lines, that line when she reappears in the dining car at the end and Caldicott just looks over and, oh, there she is. Latch must have gotten stuck.
And that's the thing I love is they fully know, oh, yeah, there's this British lady. We remember her. Yeah, she went missing. That's weird, right? Yeah.
And the reaction is just like, oh, yeah, there she is.
Oh, hey.
Witty, apparently she started acting in films at the age of 72 after a huge stage career. She appeared in Night Must Fall, which earned her an Oscar nomination. She'd work for Hitchcock again in Suspicion, where she'd play Joan Fontaine's mother, and she'd be nominated for an Oscar again for a role in Mrs. Miniver, and appear in Lassie Come Home and Gaslight. Interesting, so you have this, Suspicion, and Gaslight, so 3 movies in which women are kind of being gaslit about what situation they're in.
I still need to see Gaslight one of these days.
It's damn good. Okay, now we come to it. The most important characters in the film, Naughton Wayne as Caldicott and Basil Radford as Charters.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to have much to say about them, but I will let the two of you have a say first.
First, I have to bring up something. I can't remember if we've actually ever brought this up on the show. We've talked about it here and there. Is what we call the Moncaster whack rule, which came up when we were watching Werewolf of London, where great movie, Henry Hull's great in it, terrific horror movie. And then midway through the movie, you get these 2 drunk old lady characters who
Gin
are
goblins
beating the shit out of each other. who kind of steal the movie, and you're like, I want a whole movie with just these two characters to see what they're up to. And that's kind of what Caldicott and Charters are doing here.
We've come up against that with It's a Wonderful Life.
Quatermass Experiment, that was the Gin Goblins lady, yeah.
Oh, whoops. And there was another one, the Taxi Drivers.
Oh, from Hudsucker Proxy,
yes.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
I love it when filmmakers allow the supporting cast to just take life. And you just like, I want a series and 3 more movies with this character.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, there's a lot of Charters and Caldicott in the opening of this movie that somebody else would have just cut out and just written around and just have them show up on the train as another one of the groups that are denying they've seen Miss Froy. But that they're allowed to play out and be these emblematic symbols of being very British.
Well, not just British, but they're rather average people who are just inconvenienced by the plot. They're not in any danger. They aren't completely unaware of it. They're just inconvenienced.
But something becomes a theme with them that when shit goes down, they are reliable and they will step up and do the job and do what's necessary to help people.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're not just buffoons.
No.
Yeah. But I like that, like in the opening sequence, they're used as the contrast to Iris in terms of there's a shitty situation, there's not enough rooms to get around, but then they still feel entitled to the privilege that she is getting. And again, it's privilege versus entitlement, both of which are just based around the fact that they're snobby, rich British people.
And they're so properly British that no matter where they are, when it comes to dinner, they will dress up to the nines in a tuxedo and show up. And everyone else is looking at them like, what the hell's wrong with these two guys?
And that's what I love is like even the backstory of like they went off to somewhere and they stood for what they thought was the national anthem and kept standing for half an hour, even though it wasn't. And then that is their big thing of like, but if we don't have a hotel room, how are we going to dress for dinner?
Yep. They're so focused on being proper, and yet they're so improper to everybody else around them.
And then I love the Barry joke of one of them knocks his pajamas into the water bin. So they have to split a pair of pajamas where one's wearing the top half and one's wearing the bottom half because you can't just not wear pajamas.
I love that. It's so ridiculous and silly. And I totally missed him actually dropping the pajamas into the water the first time I saw it.
Yeah. Here's my question. Do you read them as gay?
I didn't at all, but that's an interesting take on it.
I've heard that, especially because of the two of them in bed together sharing the pajamas. I didn't really. Their reaction to women, it almost seems just like infantile and immature, like, oh, a girl? Ew. It doesn't seem as much that they're like not into women. I just think they're just these two buddies. I didn't really get a gay vibe off them. I almost feel like they're sort of asexual in a way.
Well, yeah, I don't mean gay in terms of the sexuality, but in terms of as a couple. Because even when I was 12 years old and I watched this, I'm like, oh, they're a couple, aren't they? And I think it's mostly just because they have that level of comfort and familiarity with each other. And they just feel like they've been together a lot for a very long time. And they're just so comfortable with each other. And it's, again, not even in a sexual way, but just they always read to me as they're a couple.
I look at them as sort of like Jay and Silent Bob, they're hetero life mates.
Yes. And that's a good way to put it, too. And as we'll establish, I've gone through a lot of various incarnations of Charters and Caldicott over the last couple of months. And it's interesting, kind of the ones that I like the most are the ones where they have that platonic couple vibe, where it's just, yeah, they're just the ones who are meant for each other. And then ones where they try to like build a romance around them or something like that.
I also think that like the other characters, like Hearts, like Miss Froy, they are not what they seem, because they do seem like these fuddy-duddy British types. And then once the situation goes where it goes and they end up with guns in their hands, and they're like these crack shots who are shooting the bad guys, I immediately read that maybe what we're not seeing is these two were both in World War I together. They were veterans. They kind of got through the war as war buddies, and that's been sort of their bond. And they don't talk about it. They don't bring it up to other people. Yeah. They just focus on cricket and these shallow things, but they have this deep bond because they both went through that. Especially finding out that Basil Radford actually was a World War I veteran. That's why he has that scar on his cheek.
Caught a bayonet in his face.
Yeah. So these guys have actually seen some shit and gone through it, but they don't really make a big deal out of it. It's just like, something we did, something we went through, and that's why they're always together.
And that's something that we'll get more into the remake, and there's not much to say about the TV series Charters and Caldicott because I can't find a full episode on it. But the problem with the remake and what the clips I've seen of that is they make them just stuffy British guys. Whereas I think the charm of these two actors in the role is they bring that kind of, that childlike quality to it. They're just, they're excited schoolboys.
Yeah.
And they're stuffy British guys, and they're still overgrown schoolboys who just really, really like this thing. And that's cricket. To a degree where even when they're being dismissive and assholish, it's being done in a very charming way where you're just kind of like, oh, you two. And again, what I like about the comfort between them is like you even get the bit where like they both have their feet kicked up on the same footrest with their feet against each other, or, knocking on the bathroom of, hey, can I come in? They're just so at ease with each other. That's kind of where I get that couple vibe, is like, even if they're not like putting a label on it, these are two guys who are going to be together for the rest of their lives.
I feel like they've seen each other through the best and worst, and that's kind of part of it. Yeah.
It's one of those friendships I aspire to.
I imagine they could look at like, everything blowing up around them and go, oh, funny that just exploded. Interesting. I do love that the thing that...
What's the deal with that?
The thing that finally clues them into something happening is like, nuns you don't just go around tying up nuns. Something might actually be happening here.
And then when he gets shot in the hand.
Yeah. Which, that's an interesting question. How do you read his reaction? Because one could read it as shock of like, this is really the situation. Oh my God. Or this nonchalance of, I got shot. Oh wow.
I tend to think the latter. They both seem to have a strong military background, and that may just be something I'm reading into, but I felt like his reaction was like, okay, this is serious. I'm going to go and get a gun and we're going to handle this. I'm very British and I'm not going to panic.
And he's just like, here, can I borrow your pocket square? Thanks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say they seem to, but the one guy specifically has the line that he's just very good with the gun because he likes to win prizes at the carnival.
Well, but I've noticed that Charters immediately says, don't you listen to him. He's just talking down himself. He's a crack shot.
Yeah.
I think he's just offering a facile explanation for it, but no, he actually has shot a gun in combat for real and doesn't really want to let that on.
And this is a period where a lot of people would have. But I love what I love about that reaction is if you're watching this for the first time and he suddenly stops after you hear the gunshot, if you're expecting him to then just crumble and drop dead.
Yeah.
And then when he walks in, is he then going to stumble and drop dead? But no, it's just that he got shot in the hand. And I like that they, for one moment, make you think, did they just kill one of the lovable comic reliefs? And then they didn't.
And it's funny, I had the reaction of when we did Strangers in a Train, we saw that scene where Patricia Hitchcock has been all about, murder and crime is fun. And then something really scary happens and has that kind of, oh my God, I can't believe I just saw that.
Yeah.
I took it the first time I saw this as that sort of reaction, that he's been all stuffy and, this isn't actually happening. And when he sees it's happening, there's a moment of like just shock of, oh my God, I'm just going to walk back on the train. Excuse me.
And then I think then them diving into and becoming key players in the action is the subversion of your expectation.
And then I love how they play that again in Night Train to Munich. It's so much fun there too, where that they have to disguise themselves as Nazis.
Well, and what I love about Night Train to Munich, and I get too into it, but that's the second Charters and Caldicott film, where they don't even come into the story until halfway through. And then in their usual befuddlement, they unknowingly out one of the lead characters as a spy, but then realize the situation that they put themselves in, go to help, and in doing so get pulled into this whole broader conspiracy where they are just active players in the entire remaining second half of the movie.
Yeah. In terms of Charters and Caldicott and what they might have influenced, I couldn't help but think of Nick and Fetcher from Chicken Run, the two rats. Some of their dialogue in that and their back and forth of just like, well, look at that. Has a very Caldicott and Charters vibe to it.
I mean, they're also very proto like Peg and Frost.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's coming from less upper crust and more kind of like the suburban angle. But, in terms of just that balance and that comfort off of each other. And again, what I love about all the Charters and Caldicott things is they feel like two guys who have just been together their entire lives and are going to be together for their entire lives, which is fascinating because Lady Vanishes is the first time those actors ever worked together.
For other supporting characters on the train, we have Cecil Parker as Mr. Todd Hunter, boo, and Lyndon Travers as Mrs., in quotation marks, Todd Hunter. I love that she's credited that way. We never actually find out her real name, I don't think.
No.
But the couple that are both enjoying their adulterous trysts and are trying to cover that up and reluctant to get involved. Although Mr. Todd Hunter does kind of become sort of a secondary villain in the movie. He's the one that we're allowed to completely hate and get a little joy out of him getting shot when he's waving his white flag pathetically.
Well, I think his entire role was to poke fun or at least have some commentary on the British judicial system or even just politics.
Yeah, certainly the isolationist policies of I don't want to get involved, I got my own problems.
Not just that, but interestingly, men in power who will do anything to stay in power. He's talking about how he has a judgeship coming up and he doesn't want to cause any controversy, but he's still engaging in the behaviors that I'm sure publicly he is against.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that involves the British and making judgments should be questioned.
I also looked at her as almost sort of this peek as to what Iris could have become if she ended up marrying this guy.
Oh.
That she gets tired of him, she ends up having an affair with some other guy, and she's stuck in this weird position as well.
I like that reading. And then what I like is that she does continue to play a part. She has a desire to help, but then pulls back when she realizes that that desire could put them in an uncomfortable situation, but then still even pushes beyond that of like, no, we got to do the right thing.
Well, what I found very interesting about her reactions were that they were doubly motivated. She wanted to help, of course, but beyond that, when he told her that the scandal, she's like, okay, well, I'm going to help the scandal happen, and then I'll get a divorce, and you'll get a divorce. And then finding out, oh no, my wife will never divorce me, for one thing, puts her strictly in as a mistress, whereas she thought this relationship was going to go forward. But if the scandal does happen and he doesn't get a divorce, she's getting a divorce because her husband will divorce her and she has nowhere to go. So the pullback and the helping was all dependent on things that would help her. Even though her desire was to help, the reality of the situation was she was only going to help if it would help her.
And that's what I like is how they treat it as a complex, messy scenario without making it a morality judgment. She's still treated as a good character in the end, and he's treated as a bad character for other reasons than the fact that he's in an affair.
And we see that her reaction to him getting shot, she is still kind of horrified by this, and horrified by the idea that the last thing she said to her husband is, "You'll never see me again," and realizing, oh, it's going to be true, but in a way that she didn't intend at all.
Yeah. I like how complicated they are, and I like that they cast an actor who was typically known for comedic roles for him, because while he's not playing it comedically, there's this intensity to his performance. Like, even just how brusquely he always slams the door shut and pulls the blinds.
Yeah, I think the only thing I might have seen him in was Swiss Family Robinson. I haven't seen Lady Killers yet. I still haven't gotten to Under Capricorn or Indiscreet. There's a lot of stuff he's done I haven't seen, so he was kind of a new face to me. Same with Lyndon Travers. I don't think I've seen any of these other films that she was in, like The Missing Million or Quartet that you mentioned, The Seventh Survivor. None of these seem familiar to me.
Well, and he was a bit comedic actor, like going up into throughout the 60s. Like, I know I've seen him in Amorous Adventures of Moll Flanders. He was in several of the Carry On movies. Just always known for just being like the big blowhard, stiff British guy.
And then there's Mary Claire playing the Baroness, who she doesn't get as much to do, but I think she's an interesting character because I got the sense through this whole movie, she's actually the one pulling the strings in this operation. Yeah. Any scene between her and Hartz, like when Droppo is asking for more money and he looks to the Baroness and she's like, pay him. That she's really the one running this.
Well, she's the one who tells the Nazis to open fire.
Yeah, I think that's kind of fascinating. And we don't really get to know much about her or her motivations other than she's evil. And she certainly doesn't try to hide it. But Claire does a great job just with her stare, that blank stare that she gives Iris.
She's evil, but she's of the aristocracy to some point because she is a baroness. So she's wielding her privilege and her power. And then on top of it, to complicate matters, she's a woman. So she has to take a step back and direct men to go do what she wants done.
And there's that line about how her husband is Minister of Propaganda and could cause trouble for Droppo, which seems to imply that she would give the orders to him, too, that she's running things in that marriage as well.
Yeah, in the book, she was the one who was related to the guy who the governess witnessed and all that stuff. Because in the book, she is the one pulling all the strings, too. What I like is that her and Mrs. Froy are very matronly figures, but they're very opposition. They're like yin and yang matron figures. Mrs. Froy is all the positive qualities that we expect: exuberant, supportive, caring, but sometimes to an exaggerated extreme. And the Baroness is very much the stern, controlling, everyone is listening to her commands, but taken to a very exaggerated extreme. I like that they underplay that. We never have a bit where she's like, raging after them like Mombi. Even when she's like telling the soldiers to open fire, it's very matter of fact. Quick tangent, check out the Wikipedia page for Mary Claire. Her Wikipedia photo is badass and I love it.
The last one I really want to discuss is Catherine Lacey as the nun, because for a tiny part, she has a really interesting turn in the movie.
Yeah.
Where she starts off as just this henchwoman who we're told at first is mute. And then when she starts talking, she becomes more interesting. Like, she doesn't really count on, oh, they're doing this to an English lady. I'm English. I can't have that. And I didn't know this is going to be murder. And then she turns around and starts doing all this heroic stuff, changing the signal, giving them the signal that the cop is going to kill them all, and really becomes this fascinating heroic character.
No, I like, again, the range and the nuance to her performance. And again, how it's like she's supposed to be suspicious at first, then she flips sides, but even then she tries to go along with the... Again, it's like they literally just switch out the replacements. And I like how they just play out that con in the long game.
And how the happy ending is all dependent on her making that choice not to let them get poisoned. That's the only thing that really changes the end of this. If she hadn't done that, that would have been it. Froy's dead. They wake up on the train, possibly days later, realizing they've been unable to stop this.
I'm kind of surprised, though, that they just tied her up and put her on the train.
We were discussing that it seems like in that scene, the Baroness is reaching into her bag. I thought she was going to pull out a gun and just shoot her.
Which is basically what they do in the remake.
Yeah, it is a little strange that they tie her up and leave her there. I don't know exactly what that is, or if there is any kind of reason I could rationale as to why they don't just kill her or strangle her there in the room, unless it's one of those things of neither Dr. Hartz or the Baroness want to get their hands dirty.
I don't know, and it's weird that they could then give her the hero moment of changing the tracks, and then they shoot her, but then they reveal it's okay, it's just my leg.
Yeah, that's
which I don't believe was a line in the script. We see her crumble over in pain in the script.
I was sure she was going to get killed, just sort of this, well, you shouldn't have been allied with the bad guys, all kind of justice. But no, I like that she survives.
But it's interesting that they basically echo the moment that they do with Charters getting shot in the hand, in terms of like, he's getting shot. Oh no, did they just kill him? Oh no, they're okay.
Let's move on to the cinematography by Jack E. Cox. Now, I know this movie has gotten a lot of stick for some of the model work in it, especially that opening shot.
I love the model
work. I
work.
love that model work. I think that opening shot coming down the mountain to the hotel on the train is gorgeous.
Tim, I don't know. Have you seen many Toho movies with lots of miniature effects work?
But honestly, though, like right down to the little details of the figure is next to the train, kind of moving, pointing at the train like, this is a problem.
Yeah, no, I love that opening shot of where you just go from the painting of the scenery that plays under the credits to this wonderfully elaborate miniature, even with like the driving car and everything, to then kind of fading into a push-in on the window. It's like perfectly established.
It's really good. Or some of the rear projection work, that moment where Gilbert actually climbs out onto the side of the train to try and get into the other window, it looks really good. I mean, it really looks like he is hanging onto a train.
Yeah, they match it really well. Like, even when the doctor is looking out of the window to the approaching station, it's like you have a matte of the train going off in the distance and just the one car is on set.
Early on, when the train is taking off again from the station, the back and forth between real train and model is pretty seamless. Now, Cox had worked with Hitchcock before on Murder, Skin Game, Mary, and after he moved over to America, Cox kind of stayed back in England. Didn't really move on to as much. There's like They Came by Night, Devil Girl from Mars, Up in the World, but not as many kind of really notable titles, so I don't know his work as well. And a lot of it here, because of some of it is limitations of the time, it's not quite as stylish as Hitchcock's other films, but it's still well shot, especially considering the confines of the train compartments, finding interesting angles for each different scene where it's not just the same down the hallway that you normally see from one of these movies, is pretty good.
Again, what I love was you had a shot where, again, we were following Iris as she was walking between cars, and it's like we're following over her shoulder. We see her open the door, and you have that entire train where everyone's just kind of partying and playing music and dancing. We don't have a lot of moving camera, but when it moves, they use it really well.
And the last real notable crew thing I have is the music by Louis Levy and Charles Williams, and there's really not much, despite how important music is to the plot. We have the opening credits, the music when we kind of trekking into the hotel, and after that, there's not very little non-diegetic music in the movie. There's not a lot of scoring. I know in the 30s we still weren't at a point where movies had scoring all over the place. It was kind of developing that way, but I think it was a deliberate choice on Hitchcock's part to strip that out.
Well, it was just to emphasize the music that we did hear, because that music is so important to the movie being the MacGuffin. It was a really good choice to limit what music is in the movie.
I think the way you could have done it is, like, remember how I brought up how Gilbert could like have a little note where he's jotting down tunes and melodies, is to kind of establish that there's all these little casual tunes and melodies that are going on around the world, and he has to somehow manage to parse that one out. But that would be an entirely different structure for a movie, and you'd have to do a lot of planning and organizing for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I really like how the only real melody we have is that the clarinet number with the dance party, and then that one party that's kind of happening with an accordion on the train.
And instead, this allows the rumble of the train, that low rumble that's going through every scene, to kind of be the soundtrack for the film.
Yeah.
Which I've always loved that. It's kind of one of the things I love about like planes too, that you just have that low rumble that's constantly in the background. That's almost kind of comforting. Like the bridge of the Enterprise on Next Generation, where you always have that low air conditioner rumble going all the time. You just stop noticing it after a while, but there's something kind of oddly comforting about it.
It's like and I'm sure there's a 10-hour YouTube video for it.
Oh, there is. I've seen it. So, some trivia for the film. During their legendary interview, Francois Truffaut commented that this was his favorite of Hitchcock's films. He said he would constantly watch it to try and look for all of Hitchcock's tricks, but he would just get so sucked into the plot, they would forget to look for them. Orson Welles was a fan, too, of the film. Apparently, he saw it 11 times. Hitchcock's cameo comes near the very end of the film at the train station in England. You can just see him kind of passing by the camera, smoking a cigarette, and doing this weird kind of shuddery thing with his shoulders.
The way that I saw it described was he was bouncing as though he was humming a melody.
Oh.
So you have to wonder if maybe he was humming the same tune.
That's interesting. And kind of funny that so many of Hitchcock's cameos involve him with like musical instruments, horns, and double basses and things like that. I thought this was one of that period where he wasn't really being as ostentatious with it. I mean, you could blink and miss him in this one, unlike other ones where it's a little more obvious.
Oh, man. Alfred Hitchcock School of Rock.
Here's an interesting one. The cricket match that Caldicott and Charters are trying to get to was an actual test match between England and Australia that was, as in the film, called due to rain. That would suggest that the events of the film take place from July 8th to July 12th, 1938, even though it's established in the film that it's supposed to be in spring.
And the film was written in 1936.
So it was just a lucky coincidence then.
Could be. I love just the idea that cricket can be played for days.
I know, it's weird. I assumed it was supposed to be like a series of matches. I didn't know it was just like one long match.
See, and I don't know much about cricket. I'm wondering if it's just that you have to reach like a certain threshold. Like you either have to beat them by a certain amount of points or you have to hit a certain point mark. And they don't actually call the game until you do.
The only thing I know about cricket is that if you're a Time Lord, a cricket ball is handy for throwing into space and hitting certain objects.
Yes, and the bat is very, very handy too.
Oh, that's true for killing zombies.
Yes.
The scene of the maid bending over to get to her hat box under the bed was cut from many versions and was missing from home video releases for a long time. In fact, even the Criterion DVD release had that scene missing. So a lot of people didn't understand why Charters and Caldicott are sharing that pair of pajamas since it's in that scene where they drop it into the water. I guess they decided it was too risque to have the maid's butt slightly on screen.
Did they leave in the whole room full of women in negligees?
They did. It's funny.
That whole sequence went on for pages in the script. They described it.
I know it was controversial in America, but I guess like Britain really didn't have a production code kind of thing to cut it out, so they just left it in there.
That was a scene that was in there just because they wanted to put it in there.
Well, I mean, it still happens to this day, so why not?
I'm not fully complaining about this. I'm just emphasizing that I am aware of it.
While trying to appear casual as the fake Mrs. Froy passes, Redmond comments to Iris about a bank holiday in Brighton. This actually could be a reference to Bank Holiday, a film released the same year, also starring Margaret Lockwood, that's set in Brighton.
That seems to be where, again, like how a lot of the films starring that duo seem to kind of reference the earlier films in subtle ways. I'm wondering if it was just kind of like a British studio thing of kind of like, because so many of these films are being made by so many of the same crews, it's basically just an ongoing series.
Maybe it's kind of equivalent to American movies where they'll casually, jokingly drop the title of a popular movie. To future generations, it wouldn't mean as much, but to somebody then would remember Bank Holiday and go, oh, hey, huh.
Back in the days when continuity was a different thing.
This one I thought was really interesting. Hitchcock's assistant director in this movie was Roy Ward Baker, who would go on to direct A Night to Remember and many Hammer films, including the one we discussed a while back, Quatermass in the Pit.
Ooh, one of the best.
Oh, yeah. A shot near the end of the film of the ferry returning the main characters to England was actually reused from Oh, Mr. Porter, a film also written by Frank Launder. Now, this one is kind of notorious. The failure of the copyright holder to renew the copyright led to the film falling into the public domain and a host of bad video releases from inferior prints. In fact, the first time I watched this was from one of those prints, and a lot of the dialogue was unintelligible, so I missed a lot of the great humor of this movie the first time I saw it.
In hindsight, that video set that I had was likely all public domain films from Hitchcock.
I have one the same. All the British ones are included because I think that's the case with all of those. They all fell into the public domain.
I don't remember the print being like terrible. Again, I still enjoyed the film back in the day.
It was the visuals were a little grainy, but it was the sound that was the real problem.
Though I will say they've cleaned it up nice. The one that's on the Criterion channel
looks
great.
It looks really great. Yeah. As for the legacy of the film, the story has also been adapted for radio with Errol Flynn and Flora Robson in the Philip Morris Playhouse series in 1941, and 5 different versions on BBC Radio over the next 50 years. And the film inspired many other films and television shows. In fact, there's an episode of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea called Escape from Venice that is pretty much the same story.
One thing I want to throw in is it's a shame that a lot of like the early BBC radio stuff is lost. Because I was also trying to see if I could find any of those Charters and Caldicott radio shows. I can't find a single one.
Yeah, I've been hunting for a couple of specific ones. It was even the more recent stuff. Like it was only a little while ago I was able to find the Alan Rickman BBC radio play for Rope, which is actually really great. As for other stuff that inspired, watching Breakdown, that one with Kurt Russell where his wife disappears and the guy that she hitched a ride with is like, I've never seen you before. I can't help but think that takes a lot from this movie. There's even a scene where Kurt Russell's character goes into a restaurant and is looking through the order sheets trying to find his wife's order that remind me of the scene where she's looking through the bills trying to find whether Miss Freud paid.
Well, and then I know Bunny Lake is Missing was very much influenced by this, but with the different caveat of it is actually someone who's hallucinating. And then there's the Jodie Foster film Flight Plan.
Yep, which definitely was...
with especially when she sees her child's handprint on the window.
And also, the same way this one sort of reflected the politics of England in the 1930s, that one being a post-9/11 movie, and the whole subplot of Jodie Foster immediately assuming the Middle Eastern guy on the plane must be behind her daughter's kidnapping. There's still a little of that there, too. Although... that one left a bad taste in my mouth because they never really kind of resolved that in a way where it's like, yeah, that was kind of Islamophobic of you, Jodie.
Well, I mean, it's not like she then made a film later on where her Middle Eastern boyfriend gets killed, so she becomes a Death Wish style vigilante killer.
Oh, God, that movie.
I will say Flight Plan, though, Larry Cohen did some work on the script, so if you like Larry Cohen thrillers, it's worth checking out.
Oh, I like Sean Bean in it, too, as the captain.
Yeah. Not a bad film. Not a great film. Not a bad film.
Yeah. Okay, here's where this might get a little dicey. So the film has been remade several times. 1979, the film was remade by Anthony Page with Sybil Shepherd and Elliot Gould in the lead roles. It was the last Hammer Studios film for quite a while.
Yep.
This version had the two leads rewritten to be Americans and is openly set in 1939 Bavaria with the characters fighting the Nazis. I did not care for this version of the story.
I love this version of the story.
I feel like Shepherd and Gould are horribly miscast.
I love them together.
I think making them Americans was a terrible idea. I think
brilliant idea,
especially because the script has a very much a British sensibility, but the two of them just can't deliver the dialogue that way.
Delivered it beautifully.
I don't know what the hell is with that bizarre saxophone music that follows Sybil Shepherd's character around for the whole movie.
I'll give you that.
The most I can say, I will say this. Angela Lansbury is a wonderful Miss Froy. I really like Herbert Lom as Dr. Hartz. I think they make him a very interesting character, and he does a great job in it. The action finale is pretty good. I do like the change that it's Iris who goes out and switches the train signal to save them. That's good. Other than that, I really did not care for that one.
Honestly, the only part of it I didn't like was their Charters and Caldicott, who were just too old and stuffy and didn't have like that boyishness to them.
Yeah.
I don't like it as much as I do the original. Let me just put in that caveat. But I really liked how snide and bouncy it was, and they brought in George Axelrod to do the script for it. I like that for Iris, they found kind of this balance between the character in the original movie and the character in the book, who was much more snotty and spoiled. And again, created a character that instantly insists that you underestimate them, and then puts them in a situation where they have to rise to the occasion and show that you were wrong about them.
I just found her interplay with Elliot Gould's character really weird. Like, I mean, they have that combative relationship out of nowhere. There's like, at the very least in this version, there's that inciting incident with the whole noise in the hotel room. For no reason, he's waiting for her outside, and they have this weird, snarky back and forth. That's like, where is this coming from?
Well, and the one thing is he doesn't really have any backstory in the movie.
No, he's like a photographer for Time Life, I think.
Yeah. Well,
which never comes in anywhere.
Well, and they're trying to do that Roman Holiday thing where he's a journalist and she's the socialite. And you're also kind of wondering, is he following her around because he's just hoping for a news story because she's a walking disaster news story? And I wish they had built more on that. But I really love how Elliot Gould plays it. I love how, again, completely out of touch with the situation he is at times in terms of he's not an action hero and he's suddenly forced into action scenes. I like the interplay between them. I like the bounce to it. I like that it's a more openly comedic movie, and it actually has one scene that I love that wasn't in the original where they emphasize the fact that everyone in that car is part of the conspiracy in that moment where they all suddenly leap up and jump her at the same time.
That was a good moment. And I like that Dr. Hartz has this completely different motivation that actually makes him kind of sympathetic, that his family is sort of at risk if he doesn't do this thing. But overall, I did not strike me the way this one did. It
is a little saucier. It's a little snappier. But I also like that it's very much of that period there in the 70s where we had the big ensemble period murder mysteries with, all the Agatha Christie adaptations that suddenly happened in the 70s. And this is very much coming in the wake of that. And I just really liked it. I thought it was charming. It was a bit saucier, a bit meaner, but again, in a way that then kind of made more of a challenge for you to like the characters, but they still won me over in the end.
Then there's the 2013 BBC TV movie we mentioned that's closer to the original novel with Tuppence Middleton and
Word
Tom
for word.
Hughes. Yeah. I actually did enjoy that one. It has the problem of not figuring out what to do with Iris in the end in a way that doesn't kind of weaken her as a character, but the ending is more suspenseful, and the villains are very hateable there. They do a great job with that.
Yeah, and again, it's pretty much, if you want to see what the book version was like, this is it. It's cast well, it's directed very well. I still have kind of a problem because, unlike the 70s version, I don't feel like it found the middle ground in terms of how much of an asshole to make everyone, because everyone's an asshole in that movie.
I do think it does a good job of filming Iris's scenes with Miss Froy in the beginning to emphasize that she still has a horrible headache from the sunstroke.
Yes.
She's not doing well, and that it's just this buzzing to her, and that she's barely on her feet, really. So
Yeah, but even other snaps that she has at other characters, the romance doesn't quite work.
yeah.
I do like that the very, very end scene where they don't run off together, that's a nice change from the novel.
I do agree with that. I like that.
But it's not bad. It's not bad. It's still well directed for what it is.
It's enjoyable. Okay, so what's everybody's favorite scene?
So my favorite scene is in the baggage car because it's one of the most humorous scenes in the movie. This idea that they've run across all of this magician equipment, and we've got rabbits and a baby calf and just a ridiculous scene where we have our two leads really interacting in a different way.
Yes, where he's finally fully on board,
Right.
but is still acting really weird with like the deerstalker cap and
Which
really
is
hamming it up.
wonderful. It's like, and now I'm Sherlock Holmes.
Okay, Noel, what's your favorite scene?
Definitely the drugged drink scene where, again, just on a pure acting level and in terms of Hitchcock's mastery of tension, the whole just wait to see when someone is going to pick up that glass and drink it is just so beautifully played.
It's funny because mine is actually the scene directly after when Hartz actually reveals that he has drugged them, that he's so jovial about it. And the sense that they're sitting there, they think they're feeling the effects of this drug already. And it almost reminded me of a scene from Invasion of the Body Snatchers where it's like, you're going to go to sleep and there's nothing you can do about it. And by the time you wake up, all this will be over. And yet he is so, not friendly, but at least kind of regretful about it. Like, I'm sorry you guys pushed me to this. I don't really want to hurt you. I just have to do this. You sleep now and it'll all be over. And in a later scene, I love that moment when he goes back after they're pretending to be asleep and kind of arranges them together so they'll be facing each other. Almost like, here, this will look sweeter and more romantic. There you go. But that scene was just so creepy to me, just how genteel he's trying to make this and how he's trying to make it okay that, but also this idea of Iris knowing that if she falls asleep, by the time she wakes up, that's it. She'll have failed. Mrs. Froy will be gone, have just vanished, dead somewhere. And that's where the adventure ends. That's a very spooky scene to me. Okay, recommendations.
So my recommendations basically find a movie that primarily takes place on a train. And I'm just going to toss some titles out there because I feel like the movies set on trains all work under the same constraints. You can't get off the train unless the train stops. And there's nowhere to go. There's really nowhere to hide. You just fight and you keep moving. And specifically Murder on the Orient Express, where there is a mystery and you're trying to figure out things within this confined area full of strangers. Darjeeling Limited, which while it is dealing with some family dynamics, is the same thing. Everything's close and there are certain rules you must follow. And then, of course, Snowpiercer, same situation, traveling through the train, trying to accomplish your goal, running into very, very bizarre things. And I'd like to add Train to Busan on that as well. Just this relentless train ride. You're moving through space, but you're also moving through the train and you're trying to survive this environment that you cannot get out of.
No?
Mine is going to be a 1986 anime movie called They Were 11. It is one of my favorite thrillers. It was released over here on DVD, but it's been out of print for a long time. It's actually kind of tricky to track down. Thankfully, they just re-released the manga like last month in the US. It was a 1970s manga by Moto Hagio, who has since gone on to become one of the pioneering creators of women's manga. They Were 11. The opening premise is far in the future. Humanity has spread around to hundreds of different colonies, and humans have been genetically altered to fit the environments of those planets. And this is basically the latest group of recruits at Starfleet Academy, where the final test is we're going to select 10 of you at random, and you have to go on to a decommissioned starship, and you have to survive for 30 days. And if anything goes wrong, here's a button that you can hit where we will send help immediately. But if you press the button, you fail the test. But when the 10 students arrive on the ship, there's 11 of them. And so you have this whole mystery of who is the 11th person, why is the 11th person here, and when things start going wrong on the ship, is someone sabotaging it? Is someone trying to kill someone? Is there something else going on? There's this whole mystery of who is the 11th person. And it's this really good Hitchcockian thriller that just happens to be a sci-fi anime.
Okay, I'd have to continue the train theme. First, I have to go with the 1952 film noir Narrow Margin from Richard Fleischer. A really great suspenseful film with Charles McGraw as this square-jawed cop who is assigned to protect a mob witness played by Mary Windsor and is transporting her on a train and spends the entire movie unsure of who on the train might be a mob hitman who's out to kill his witness. McGraw's great, but Mary Windsor as this really snarky, mean-spirited witness who's constantly just attacking him and poking at him is wonderful. It's really good. A lot of the photography and the way they shoot the train scenes for suspense remind me a lot of this movie. I think there was a lot of influence there. And the other one is Arthur Hiller's comedy Silver Streak from 1976, which is very specifically a Hitchcock homage. And that one, Gene Wilder is kind of in the middle of this budding romance with Jill Clayburgh, who he meets on a train, and all of a sudden, in the middle of this romantic night, he thinks he sees a murder happening on the train. And when he tries to report it, he's told, no, it didn't happen. No, the guy that you think you saw murdered, here he is. See, he's fine. Everything's okay. And it just uncovers this weird conspiracy that's happening on the train. There's a lot of North by Northwest in it. There's a lot of this movie. He strikes up this weird partnership with this convict played by Richard Pryor, which is really funny. It does have some humor that really doesn't age well. One of the big comedic scenes in the movie is Gene Wilder made up to look like a black guy so he can get past the cops, which is really, really unfortunate now. But the rest of the movie around it is actually really good and a lot of fun. Alrighty, Noel, where can people find your work on the internet?
You can just check me out on Twitter at NoelCT. I have various shows that kind of all centrally come from there. Thankfully, Shumacast finally wrapping up the last of the episodes that we've already recorded. Just still have a lot of them. Masters of Carpentry, going to have some new stuff coming out, especially with the finales of the new Halloween trilogy.
That ends the conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about The Lady Vanishes or feel that we missed something, check out the comment section for this episode on cinemaspection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to cinemaspection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter at CinemaSpection. We're also on Instagram under CinemaSpection. Our show is available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Amazon Music, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe, and if you have a moment, please leave us a review there. We appreciate your feedback, and your reviews help increase our visibility. We're also now part of the Fireside Alliance podcast network. Check out some of the other great shows on the network at www.firesidealliance.com and join our Discord. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, thanks for listening, and remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than what's on the screen. I saved you a pickle!